Yeah, it's also a love story, right? You know, Trinity.
Behind the enigmatic smile that has graced our screens for decades lies a story that will shatter your heart. Keanu Reeves. The name alone conjures images of Neo defying gravity, John Wick seeking vengeance, and a man who has become Hollywood's most beloved soul. But what you're about to discover goes far beyond the characters he's portrayed. It's the raw, unfiltered truth of a man whose life reads like a Greek tragedy, one loss after another, each more devastating than the last. At 61, Keanu Reeves stands as cinema's most genuine treasure. In an industry built on facades, he remains achingly authentic. While others chase headlines, he chooses humility. Where others demand attention, he offers kindness. Yet beneath this extraordinary grace lies a darkness so profound, so relentlessly cruel, that it would have broken lesser souls into pieces. This is not just another celebrity story. This is the chronicle of a man who has stared into the abyss of human suffering and somehow emerged with his humanity intact. A man who has turned unimaginable pain into quiet compassion, transforming every scar into a source of strength for others. If you believe that true greatness is measured not by fame or fortune, but by how we rise from our deepest falls, then stay with us. Because what Keanu has endured, and how he's chosen to carry that burden, will change how you see not just him, but life itself. The seeds of sorrow. Long before Hollywood knew his name, fate was already sharpening its blade for Keanu Charles Reeves. Born on September 2, 1964 in Beirut, Lebanon, his very name whispered of poetry. Cool breeze over the mountains, in Hawaiian. But the poetry of his early years would be written in loss, not light. His father, Samuel Nolan Reeves Jr., was a man of many backgrounds. Hawaiian, Chinese, Portuguese, English, but fleeting presence. By the time Keanu could form memories, his father had already begun his disappearing act. At 2 years old, Samuel walked out of their lives. At 13, Keanu would see him one final time on Hawaiian soil. A goodbye without words, a silence that would echo through decades. It was as if he vanished into silence, Keanu would later recall, his voice carrying the weight of that abandonment. The absence carved something hollow inside him, a space that would always ache for the father who chose to remain a ghost. Patricia Taylor, his mother, became both anchor and storm in his young life. A costume designer with dreams bigger than her circumstances, she carried her children from Beirut to Sydney, then New York, finally settling in Toronto. Each move brought hope for stability, each new marriage a gamble on security that never quite paid off. The carousel of stepfathers taught young Keanu a brutal lesson. Love could arrive with fanfare and disappear without warning. Half-sisters and step-siblings entered and exited his world like characters in a play that never found its final act. Only Kim, his younger sister, remained constant, the one person who shared his blood and understood the particular chaos of their childhood. School became another battlefield. Dyslexia made every page a struggle, every lesson a reminder of difference. Teachers saw defiance where there was only confusion. One principal expelled him for asking too many questions. Questions born not of rebellion, but of a desperate need to understand a world that never stopped shifting beneath his feet. I questioned everything too much, he would admit years later. I couldn't help it, even if it got me into trouble. Through 4 high schools in 5 years, Keanu learned to pack light and adapt fast. But it was on the ice where he found his first real identity. As a goalkeeper, they called him the Wall. His reflexes were lightning, his resolve unbreakable. Hockey wasn't just a sport, it was his sanctuary, his first taste of belonging. He dreamed of the Ontario Hockey League, perhaps even the Olympics. For a boy whose life had been defined by instability, hockey promised something magnificent, a future built on his own skill and determination. Then came the injury that changed everything. At 15, when most teenagers still believed in unlimited tomorrows, a devastating hit tore through his knee and his dreams in the same cruel instant. The boy who had been unbreakable on the ice, suddenly found himself sidelined, watching others chase the future he had imagined for himself. The silence in that hospital room was deafening. Not just the absence of cheering crowds or the whistle of skates on ice, but the sound of hope deflating. Hockey had been his identity, his escape, his proof that he could excel despite everything else falling apart. But even in that devastation, something remarkable happened. The injury that ended one dream nudged him toward another. The stage began to whisper where the rink had once roared. Theater became his new arena, and though he couldn't have known it then, that forced transition would eventually lead him to become one of cinema's most enduring figures. Looking back, Keanu would reflect, "Grief changes shape, but it never ends." Even as a teenager, he was already learning that truth. That loss doesn't disappear, it transforms. The absent father became empathy for the abandoned. The carousel of broken families taught him to value authentic connections. Dyslexia gave him patience with imperfection, and the injury that stole hockey opened the door to acting. These early wounds didn't harden him into bitterness. Instead, they forged him into something rarer, a soul capable of carrying pain without passing it on to others. Hollywood's reluctant star. When the roar of the hockey arena fell silent, Keanu didn't surrender to that silence. He transformed it into something else entirely. The stage called to him with a different kind of promise, and a young man who had already learned survival would now learn to make others believe in dreams. His early steps into entertainment were humble and hungry. Canadian television shows that paid survival wages. A Coca-Cola commercial where he downed soda with the desperation of someone proving he belonged. Even hosting a children's program, where his awkward charm somehow won over young hearts. These weren't glamorous beginnings. They were the grinding work of a dreamer who understood that nothing would be handed to him. With little more than a battered Volvo and a suitcase full of hope, Keanu drove into Los Angeles. The city that had crushed countless dreams now had another young actor knocking on its unforgiving doors. He rented bare apartments, stretched every dollar until cupboards went empty, and auditioned for roles that rarely materialized. Casting directors studied him with puzzled expressions. Was he leading man material or just another drifter with a hard-to-pronounce name? In a town that chewed up dreamers daily, Keanu had only his bare hands and unbreakable will. Then came the breakthrough that no one saw coming. River's Edge, a bleak indie film, revealed something raw and authentic in his performance. Critics began to whisper that this young actor carried a weight too genuine to be manufactured. They were right. The grief on screen was a mirror of the losses he'd already endured. It was during this fragile moment of recognition that he met River Phoenix, a kindred spirit who would become far more than a co-star. River was fire where Keanu was stone, wild energy balanced by quiet strength. In each other, they found the brotherhood that their fractured childhoods had denied them. But just as Keanu was reaching for roles with depth and meaning, Hollywood played one of its cruelest jokes. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure catapulted him to fame as the lovable, goofy time traveler Ted. While millions fell in love with his portrayal, the success became a cage. The Airhead label stuck to him like glue, and suddenly the industry that had discovered his dramatic depth decided he was too light for darkness, too simple for complexity. "I craved something lighthearted," he would later admit, but that label stayed with me for years. Even triumph had teeth. Every cheer carried its shadow, and Keanu found himself fighting not just for roles, but for the right to be seen as more than a punchline. Yet these struggles were quietly building something more valuable than immediate success: endurance. The boy who had packed and unpacked suitcases through childhood was now learning to carry his true home within himself. Persistence, humility, and an absolute refusal to quit. The world hadn't yet crowned him a legend, but he was already proving the truth that mattered most: he would not break. Not from rejection, not from typecasting, not from the endless grinding uncertainty of an actor's life. Each setback was teaching him that real strength isn't the absence of struggle. It's the choice to continue despite it. Hollywood would eventually recognize what he truly was. But even before that recognition came, Keanu Reeves was becoming something rarer than a movie star. A man whose character had been forged in fire and emerged unbroken. The climb to greatness. The 1990s arrived, and with them came the roles that would begin to define Keanu Reeves, not just as an actor, but as a force of nature. Yet, even as his star rose, the shadows of tragedy were already gathering on the horizon. Point Break shattered the pretty boy stereotype that had threatened to limit him. As Johnny Utah, he wasn't just chasing bank robbers through adrenaline-fueled sequences. He was proving that he could carry both action and authenticity with equal conviction. The film revealed his paradox, a man who could lace danger with sincerity, making every punch feel both physical and emotional. When Speed exploded into theaters, the world finally saw what those closest to him had always known. This wasn't just another action hero. This was someone who could make you believe in heroism itself. Sandra Bullock, his radiant co-star, would later confess they had mutual crushes during filming, but both chose to protect something more precious than romance, a friendship that has endured over 3 decades. The studio waved a fortune at him for a sequel. In a move that shocked Hollywood, Keanu said no. It wasn't about money, it was about integrity. That single refusal drew a line in the sand, proving his career would be built on principle, not profit. The industry punished him for it, whispering that he was reckless and unwise, but Keanu bore their judgment in characteristic silence. Mid-decade brought its trials. Johnny Mnemonic and Chain Reaction stumbled at the box office. Critics circled like vultures and the whispers grew louder. Maybe he was just a pretty face after all, hollow beneath those piercing eyes. But then came My Own Private Idaho, and everything changed. Beside River Phoenix, his closest friend and chosen brother Keanu bared a vulnerability that silenced every critic. Their on-screen chemistry was electric, but it was their off-screen bond that truly mattered. River was the family Keanu had never known. Wild, tender, broken in ways that mirrored his own fractured childhood. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like Keanu had found someone who understood the particular loneliness of his journey. That fragile happiness wouldn't last. Then 1999 arrived like a thunderclap, bringing with it The Matrix, the role that would redefine not just Keanu's career, but cinema itself. Becoming Neo demanded everything. Weeks of punishing martial arts training left his muscles screaming. Wirework twisted his frame until every joint begged for mercy. A severe neck injury forced him into braces while he continued learning to fight. He bent reality on screen, but off-screen he was bending himself into agony. For audiences, Neo was revelation. For Keanu, it was destiny written in blood, sweat, and relentless pain. The applause was deafening, but applause is fleeting. When the credits faded, the old doubts crept back. Wooden. Limited. Lucky. The same cruel words that had haunted him in classrooms now echoed through entertainment headlines. Misunderstood, mislabeled, mocked, and still Keanu climbed. Each insult became another stone on the mountain he refused to stop ascending. Years passed. Other stars faded into cameos and comeback attempts. Then in 2014, when many had written him off as a relic of the 90s, lightning struck again. John Wick wasn't just a comeback, it was a resurrection. What began as a simple revenge thriller became modern mythology. Keanu trained with brutal devotion that would have broken actors half his age. Days on shooting ranges, nights learning precision driving, weeks of choreography so punishing that bruises mapped his sacrifice across his entire body. His aging knees screamed in protest. His joints stiffened from repeated impacts. Yet he refused to hand the physical work to stunt doubles. On screen, John Wick was a man surviving grief. Off screen, Keanu was a man proving that legends aren't born. They're forged in the fire of absolute dedication. By Chapter 4, the franchise had crowned him not just as a star reborn, but as a warrior carved from pure endurance. For Keanu Reeves, glory has never been gentle. Every triumph left a scar. Every standing ovation hid hours of suffering. The world saw Neo dodging bullets and John Wick dismantling armies, but behind the curtain was a man whose body bore the cost of every chire, whose heart carried losses no role could ever erase. Just as he stood at his highest peak, the cruelest shadows of his personal life were waiting in the wings, ready to remind him that even the brightest fame cannot outshine the darkness of genuine grief, love, and unspeakable loss. Behind the enigmatic smile that captivated millions lay a heart that had known love in its purest forms, and loss in its cruelest manifestations. Keanu Reeves' romantic life was never the glittering carousel of red carpet romances that Hollywood adores. Instead, it was a path marked by tender beginnings, whispered hopes, and heartbreaks that would carve scars deeper than any physical wound. His first taste of serious love came in the late 1980s, with actress Jill Schoelen on the set of Babes in Toyland. For 3 years, they clung to each other like young dreamers, sketching futures in the sky and daring to believe that love could grant them permanence. But Jill's extroverted sparkle collided with Keanu's quiet reserve. The distance between their rising careers pulled them apart like opposing currents. When their relationship ended in 1989, it wasn't just a breakup. It was the shattering of his first fragile belief that love could become home. That early heartbreak left an ache that lingered, teaching him a truth that would haunt his years. Love, no matter how radiant, could vanish as easily as morning mist. In the years that followed, his name drifted through tabloids like a ghost with no anchor. Whispers connected him to Sofia Coppola, fleeting dinners with Diane Keaton, rumors linking him to Claire Forlani, Charlize Theron, Cameron Diaz. Some may have been real, others mere inventions of a restless press. But Keanu never fed the circus. He moved through fame with deliberate restraint, carrying his heart like fragile glass, as though he already knew the spotlight could shatter what it touched. Among the noise, two connections stood apart, too genuine to be dismissed as gossip. Sandra Bullock, his radiant partner in Speed, would later confess she'd harbored a crush during filming. Keanu admitted the feeling was mutual, yet both chose to protect something more precious than romance. They buried the possibility before it could be tested, creating something rarer, a friendship that has endured more than 3 decades. Winona Ryder became something closer to a soul twin. Their bond began in 1992 on the set of Bram Stoker's Dracula, where they enacted a wedding so authentic that Winona still jokes they might somehow truly be married. What lingered was unspoken yet undeniable. Two guarded souls who recognized themselves in each other's silence. Their connection was love without a name, tender enough to survive decades, haunting enough to leave the world forever wondering what it might have been. But love would return in a form that felt undeniable. In 1998, at a party for his band Dog Star, Keanu met actress Jennifer Syme. She was luminous, tender, with a spirit that mirrored his own quiet depth. Their connection was immediate and profound, as though fate had finally decided to grant him what he'd long been denied, not just affection, but the fragile hope of family. For a man who had grown up packing and unpacking suitcases, who had carried emptiness where a father should have stood, Jennifer was more than romance. She was a promise. They moved in together, creating a modest sanctuary far from cameras where ordinary moments, cooking, music, late-night laughter, felt like treasures he'd been chasing all his life. By 1999, Jennifer was pregnant with their first child. For Keanu, it wasn't simply joy, it was redemption. The dream he'd carried since boyhood of a stable home, of holding a daughter in his arms, of finally mending the fractures of his past, was within reach. He prepared for her arrival with a tenderness that surprised even his closest friends. Then came Christmas Eve, 1999, and the cruelty that words can barely contain. Their daughter Ava was stillborn. The nursery they had lovingly prepared stood silent, filled not with the baby's cries, but with unbearable quiet. Little clothes folded neatly in drawers, an empty crib waiting in vain, every detail transformed into a shrine of absence. Friends recall Keanu's haunted stillness, the way his eyes seemed to carry a weight beyond language. He didn't lash out or seek attention in his grief. His silence was deafening, the silence of a man whose hope had been torn from him before he could even hold it. The loss struck at the very heart of their love. For a fleeting moment, Keanu had believed he was on the cusp of healing the wounds that had marked his entire life. With Jennifer, he had glimpsed the family he'd always ached for. But fate, merciless as ever, wasn't finished with him. The shadow that had stalked Keanu since childhood was about to deliver its cruelest blow of all. In April 2001, the phone call came. The kind that splits a life into before and after. Jennifer Syme, the woman who had been his steady flame, his glimpse of future and family, was gone. A single-car accident had taken her instantly on Cahuenga Boulevard in Los Angeles. Those who stood near him later recalled not a scream or collapse, but something far more haunting. Stillness. He froze as though the very air had been torn from his lungs. The world saw not Neo, not any of his characters, but simply a man hollowed out by loss, stripped of all the armor that fame had given him. At Jennifer's funeral, Keanu walked forward carrying her coffin on his shoulder, his head lowered, his expression unreadable yet devastating in its restraint. Each step seemed to carry not just the weight of the casket, but the unbearable truth that half of his heart was being lowered into the ground with her. The cameras caught his silhouette, but they could not capture the silence. The way he lingered at her grave after others had drifted away, hands clenched, shoulders slightly hunched, a figure carved from sorrow itself. Grief changes shape, but it never ends, he would later say. Those words were more than philosophy. They were confession, testimony, a roadmap of his life. Jennifer's death wasn't just another tragedy in his story. It was the moment that carved into him a final, devastating lesson. That love, no matter how radiant, can be stolen in an instant. Yet even as that truth hollowed him, it also shaped him. Her absence became part of his presence, her memory folded into the gentleness he would extend to strangers, colleagues, anyone who crossed his path. In carrying her loss, Keanu Reeves became something more than an actor. He became a vessel of compassion, proof that the deepest wounds, borne quietly and with dignity, can transform pain into grace and loss into a legacy that outlives the fallen. When death came for his brother, some wounds don't creep in slowly, they strike like lightning, tearing through your world before you even realize it's shattered. For Keanu Reeves, that lightning came on the night of October 30th, 1993, when the call reached him that River Phoenix had collapsed outside the Viper Room in West Hollywood and would never rise again. River was only 23, a prodigy consumed too soon by a fatal combination that stole the breath from his body and the future from his hands. For Hollywood, it was the loss of a rising star. For Keanu, it was the theft of his other half. They had been more than colleagues or casual friends. On the set of My Own Private Idaho, they had bared themselves without masks. Two young men from broken homes, each carrying loneliness like a hidden wound, finding in the other a reflection that made the chaos survivable. River was fire, dazzling, restless, untamed, burning bright enough to light up any room he entered. Keanu was stone, steady, grounding, quietly protective, providing the stability that River's wild energy desperately needed. Together, they created a balance that felt unbreakable, a brotherhood that seemed destined to last decades. But the unbreakable shattered overnight. Those close to Keanu recall that he didn't erupt when the news came. Instead, he folded into himself, disappearing into a silence so complete it was more frightening than any scream would have been. Later, he would confess to spending hours crying alone, unable to be consoled, his grief pouring out in waves that no one else could witness. In front of cameras and reporters, he spoke little. It wasn't denial, it was the only armor he had left. The pain was too sacred to display, too raw to perform for public consumption. So he buried it and carried it forward like a ghost that followed him from set to set, role to role. Rivers' death carved itself into every performance Keanu gave afterward. When critics praised the newfound depth of sorrow in his acting, they were witnessing more than craft. They were seeing Rivers' absence channeled through him. The shadow behind his eyes, the quiet pauses, the way his characters seemed to understand that joy is always fragile. Every triumph of his career in the years that followed was haunted by the silence of a friend who should have been there to share it. Every standing ovation carried the ghost of someone who would never applaud again. Every premiere felt incomplete because the person who had understood his journey best was no longer there to witness where it led. But Rivers' death became more than personal tragedy. It transformed into cautionary wisdom. In it lay the stark reminder that talent, youth, and brilliance are not shields against life's cruelties, that even the brightest flames can be extinguished if we mistake recklessness for freedom. Keanu never turned that lesson into sermons or public statements, but he embodied it, living with humility, shunning excess, showing gratitude for the simple gift of being alive. Where River had burned too fast and too bright, Keanu learned to tend his flame carefully, protecting not just his own life, but honoring his friend's memory through every careful choice. Grief changes shape, but it never ends, he would say years later. In the silence left by River Phoenix, those words became prophecy. River's passing wasn't just the end of a friendship. It was the permanent theft of a brotherhood that had once lit Keanu's world. And though that scar never fully healed, it shaped him into the man the world now reveres. River's death became proof that the deepest wounds, borne quietly and with dignity, can transform pain into compassion and loss into a legacy that outlives the fallen. In losing River, Keanu learned that love doesn't end with death. It changes form, becoming memory, wisdom, and the determination to live gently in a world that can be unspeakably cruel. Fighting for family life had never shown Keanu mercy, and it would not soften now. This time, fate's cruelty arrived not as a sudden blow, but as a slow, merciless erosion of someone bound to him by blood and unwavering love. His younger sister Kim, just 2 years his junior, received the diagnosis that every family dreads: leukemia. From that moment, Keanu's existence became a pendulum swinging between the blinding lights of Hollywood and the sterile corridors of hospitals. On screen, the world saw him as Neo, the indestructible savior bending bullets and defying destiny. Off-screen, he was simply a brother in a thin hospital chair, shoulders slumped with exhaustion, reading aloud through endless nights while fluorescent lights hummed overhead. His hand clasped Kim's as chemotherapy drained her body, his voice steady even when his heart shattered with every labored breath she took. The contrast was almost unbearable. On one side, fans screamed his name on red carpets, cameras flashed, and critics debated his performances. On the other, he whispered Kim's name in quiet prayers, begging for miracles that medicine couldn't always promise. Friends remember the small acts that revealed the depth of his devotion. How he quietly purchased a home near Los Angeles so Kim would never feel far from family. How he rearranged entire shooting schedules without explanation, flying back to Toronto at a moment's notice when she needed him. How he turned down lucrative roles because some days, nothing in the world mattered more than sitting at her bedside, being present for whatever she might need. In those hospital rooms, under the antiseptic glow of medical equipment, Keanu Reeves was not a movie star. He was simply a brother, fragile, exhausted, utterly human, yet completely unwilling to abandon his post. Kim fought with unimaginable courage, and after long years of treatment, chemotherapy, and countless hospital visits, she eventually reached remission. To the outside world, it looked like victory. But for Keanu, the scars of her battle never fully healed. He had already known the agony of sudden loss. Car crashes, stillborn children, lives stolen in an instant. But this was grief in its slowest, cruelest form. Watching someone you love more than yourself suffer day after day, and realizing that all the money, all the fame, all the devotion in the world couldn't take the pain away. That helplessness etched itself into his soul, leaving a mark that no role, no standing ovation could ever erase. From that crucible of sorrow grew one of his most extraordinary hidden legacies. Without speeches or headlines, Keanu quietly established a charitable foundation dedicated to children's hospitals and cancer research. He donated millions but never attached his name, never sought recognition or tax benefits. It wasn't charity for credit. It was gratitude whispered to every doctor and nurse who had stood by Kim's side, and a solemn vow to spare other families the helplessness he had endured. Kim's illness was another devastating chapter in the book of loss he'd been forced to read since childhood. Life had already stripped him of a father, a child, and the woman he loved. But with Kim, he proved something more enduring than grief. That love, patient, steady, selfless, can survive even in the shadow of death. The world will never see the countless nights he walked hospital corridors, whispering reassurances while tears stained the silence. Yet those invisible vigils shaped him as surely as any performance ever could. In every subsequent role, in every quiet gesture of generosity toward others, the echo of Kim's battle lingers. Her survival wasn't just her triumph, it was his redemption. Living proof that even in a life stalked by relentless loss, there are battles worth fighting and bonds that no darkness can ever truly break. Through Kim's illness, Keanu learned that heroism isn't always about dodging bullets or defeating armies. Sometimes it's as simple as showing up day after day, holding someone's hand through their darkest hours and refusing to let them face their fears alone. The body's price. The body, like the heart, has limits. For Keanu Reeves, every film has pushed those limits further, until pain itself became his most faithful companion. The applause fades, the lights dim, but the toll remains, etched into him like scars on stone. The world worshipped the myth of the indestructible warrior. What it never saw was the man limping into the shadows after each cut, carrying pain stitched into his very frame, silence masking the torment of a body pushed far beyond forgiveness. It began with The Matrix, when Hollywood demanded not just performance but complete physical transformation. For months, he surrendered himself to martial arts training so merciless that he staggered out, trembling, drenched in sweat, muscles shaking from exhaustion. The wirework twisted his spine. The choreography bruised his skin until it resembled a battlefield map. Then came the cruelest blow, a spinal injury so severe that doctors warned paralysis was a real possibility. Surgeons performed delicate neck surgery, fusing vertebrae with precision that would determine whether he'd walk normally again. Most actors would have stepped back, chosen safety over career. Keanu did not. Before the scars had even healed, still strapped in a medical brace, he returned to training. On screen, Neo bent bullets and defied physics. Off screen, Keanu bent himself into relentless agony, each move a defiance against the limits threatening to destroy him. "I never wanted to let the audience down," he would confess years later. Simple words that carried the weight of a vow sealed in suffering. But cinema is merciless, and the cost only climbed higher. When John Wick arrived, he refused to hide behind stunt doubles. He drilled live fire training until his fingertips blistered and bled. He threw his body into judo slams and jujitsu locks until his shoulders screamed with fire. He rehearsed gun-fu sequences with such obsession that his knuckles stiffened and swelled like damaged machinery. Nights were spent on racetracks, spinning cars at blistering speeds, the violence of each drift rattling his bones to the core. By Chapter 4, the price had been carved visibly into his stride. knees worn down by years of punishing impacts, tendons stiff as over-tightened steel. Every landing sending shockwaves through joints long past their prime. Fans marveled at his precision and dedication. Doctors would have marveled simply that he could still walk without assistance. Through it all, Keanu never allowed complaints to escape his lips. No headlines of protest, no indulgence in self-pity, only discipline. Only the silent agreement that his body would fail before his promise to audiences ever would. Then, in his 6th decade, came the cruel reminder that no body can defy time indefinitely. It happened during filming of Good Fortune, what should have been a simple cold immersion scene. One slip, one wrong angle, and his knee gave way, with a sound he later described as like a potato chip breaking. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was symbolic, the clearest sign yet that even legends cannot outrun age. For days he walked with visible difficulty, forcing himself through physical therapy, willing his body forward so the cameras could keep rolling. The injury was manageable, but its meaning was devastating. Even the strongest walls eventually revealed their fractures. "My heart wants to keep going," he admitted quietly during recovery, "but I'm not sure my knees agree." What breaks the heart isn't the injury itself, but the way Keanu meets it. He doesn't curse his body or rage against aging. Instead, he listens. He adapts. He trades the punishing discipline of combat training for gentler rituals. Long swims at dawn, quiet walks at dusk, stretches performed with the patience of prayer. He treats recovery as sacred ceremony, honoring the body that has carried him through every storm of his life. At 61, his health bears the undeniable marks of sacrifice. Knees worn down by countless impacts, tendons stiffened by repetitive strain, strength tested by decades of pushing beyond reasonable limits. Yet these very marks are what make him extraordinary. They're not signs of weakness. They're living monuments to devotion, to resilience, to the unyielding spirit that has defined Keanu Reeves from the beginning. For fans, this truth is both heartbreaking and inspiring. To watch him now is to witness not just an actor, but a warrior of endurance. A man who has transformed frailty into strength, scars into symbols, and every painful step into proof of what it means to give everything for your art. Each limp, each scar, each weary breath isn't a weakness, it's a monument. A monument to dedication, to the refusal to quit, to the extraordinary spirit of a man who has literally bled for his craft and somehow emerged more beloved than ever. Sanctuary in the Hills. Now at 61, having crossed into a new decade of life, Keanu Reeves no longer seeks validation from stadium crowds or the glitter of premieres. The man who once bent reality as Neo and carved vengeance as John Wick has discovered a different kind of stage, one without cameras, applause, or scripts. His sanctuary perches quietly in the Hollywood Hills, high above Los Angeles' restless sprawl. This isn't the kind of house that screams for attention or demands recognition. Purchased in the early 2000s after decades of drifting through hotels and rented apartments, the property spans over 5,600 square feet on less than half an acre of carefully chosen land. To call it a mansion would miss the point entirely. The walls of glass open wide to the horizon, inviting a morning light to spill across shaded patios and into rooms designed not for spectacle but for peace. A koi pond glimmers quietly in the courtyard, its surface broken only by the gentle movement of fish beneath. A lap pool stretches narrow and long, its edge seeming to dissolve into the skyline, built not for display but for therapy. There are verandas where twilight lingers like an old friend, and gardens where silence gathers as if it has been waiting for him all his life. The architecture, originally designed in the late 1980s for an art collector, mirrors Keanu's own values. Modernist yet warm, minimalist yet alive with natural light. One wing dissolves the boundary between indoors and outdoors, just as Keanu has always sought openness without spectacle. Friends who have visited describe the home as feeling less like a celebrity estate and more like a temple of calm. A place where grief can soften, where the body can heal, where the soul can finally rest.